Hello, this is Amin, and this is session 14 of ASP.NET Core tutorial. In this session, we are going to talk about controller. If you haven't watched session 10, 11, and 12, I highly recommend watching those sessions because during session 10, 11, and 12, I was talking about MVC and controller and routing, and I went to detail of controller and routing. And if you watch those three sessions, you are familiar with controller and you can understand this session better. In this session, first of all, I want to tell you controller is a class that is implemented from controller class that is suffix with word controller. As you can see in this project that I've been working so far during this tutorial, this is home controller and it is implemented from controller class, and it has suffix controller, and name of this controller is home. Each controller contains several methods which calls action method, and I describe in routing during session 12 that how you can access this action method with the URL in the browser. In this session, we discuss about passing data to controller. The first method that I'm talking is through routing and input parameters. If you look at this route after the controller and action, I have two optional parameter, ID and name, and I can access those values through the parameters in the action method. Let's flip to Visual Studio and implement these passing data to controller. First, let me clean this part of code which threw an exception, and go to the startup and change routing and add name to routing. In this routing, I need a controller and action, and ID and name is optional, and within index I receive ID and name as well, and in return part I mention ID equal ID and name equal name. Let's run the project. As you can see, I haven't set value for ID and name as it is the default route. If I go to home controller and index action, the first part that I enter would be ID. I enter, for example, 1, 2, 3 as ID, and name is golden courses, the second part, and run the project once. As you can see, ID is equal the fourth part after domain name and controller name and action name, and then I have ID name, which is 1, 2, 3, and you can see it here. And the fourth part would be name, which is reflected here. Let me back to the project and review the code again. I have ID and name optional here, and also I have two input parameters, ID and name. Just bear in mind these two names should be equal these two. To prove this fact, I changed name to name1 and build the project once more. And again, I will go to home, index 456 as ID. And if you saw, I changed name to name1, and write the name one here. As you can see, the fourth part is not mapped here because this part should be same as this optional element in the routing, and I should change it to name same as the thing that I entered in routing to be reflected and shaped in my action. Let's back to presentation, and the next way that I can pass value to my action method is through query string. If you look at the URL, you can see I have one as ID and question mark, and I pass one query string to my action result. Let's implement this change to my project. Let's flip to Visual Studio and change the routing to default routing and save it. And here I still have ID and name, but this time I want to pass name through query string. Let's build the project once more. As in default route, I don't have ID and name, but this time I wrote to home index. ID would be 789, question mark, name would be equal golden courses. And let's run the project. And you can see this time ID is passed to my action method through routing, and the name is passed to my controller through query string. And the third way that I can pass value to controller is through, again, query string, but this time I didn't mention the query string in the input parameters, but I can use request.query and name of query string here to catch the value of query string. Let's implement this change to my project and check this option as well. This time I remove this input element from here, and for accessing to that query string I use request class, and within the request class I have query, and within query I mention the name of query that I want to pass to this action method. Its name is name, and let's run the project once more, and let's route to home controller index action method, and this time I pass ID to my project. For example, ID would be 456, and the query string name would be equal golden courses, and run the project. And you can see the same result. This time I catch the value of a query string to request.query and name of my query string. That's it in this video. I hope this session would be useful, and don't forget to follow us and subscribe our channel and follow us on our social media. Thank you for watching this session.